He's one of us.
We accept you.
It's the Cheap Chills Show.
Very nice.
And now, here is your host, Ben Walker Story.
Hello, hello. Ben Walker Story with you once again. I'm an illustrator, an animator, a father, husband, lover, and I like spooky weird stuff. Just no blood, okay? And this is the new Cheap Chills podcast. I'm talking with other artists and creators about our memories of all things spooky and weird and how they influence what we do now. I'm still unpacking what exactly all that means, but luckily my guest for this episode was nice enough to take some time to help me hash all that out. Kenneth Filmer is half of a film and television production / promotion company called Khloaris out of New York City. We came into this with a theme in mind, which was remember working at your local video store. But we ended up talking about pretty much everything from him hosting his own indie film screenings to what exactly an executive producer does for a film like Ghost Team starring Amy Sedaris, John Heder, and Justin Long, to our thoughts on the band Kiss. I feel pretty good about this chat. Especially after the first half hour or so when I could loosen up and stop worrying about being a good interviewer. So here it is, my conversation with Kenneth Filmer, already in progress.
I mean, I do music stuff some too, so I have stuff to do that. And, and we've done, every so often, since, my partner, the other half of Khloaris, is an animator, I sometimes produce like little voiceover things and stuff for what we're working on.
Nice.
And I can score something if I need to. I mean,
what kind of music do you do?
I used to play in like kind of punk and garage bands, and now, I do kind of, I usually like to find if we're working on a project, because we know a lot of people that do music, and that's part of it, getting someone involved. But there have been times that, like some kind of experimental ambient stuff for a piece, or we did early in COVID, we did a spec thing for some COVID mask campaign, and we did a little animated piece, and I did like sort of a Davie Allan style, fuzz-guitar, like what he would do in the biker movies. Right. I used like samples for the background tracks. I used samples from one of those old like Optagon keyboards, which was an early sampling, but this is a digitized version of it. And then I played fuzz guitar on top of it.
Who was it that did the soundtrack to Barbarella?
Barbarella was...
I'm really good at blanking on names, but Bob Crew generation.
Bob Crew, yeah.
That's super fuzzy 60s guitar. I love that stuff.
Yeah. No, I love 60s fuzz guitar. I mean, the Davie Allan stuff, the soundtracks that he did, which, Wild Angels and Born Losers, Mike Curb from, he was the producer and took most of the credit, but the Davie Allan stuff, it was just like, a Mosrite, Fuzzrite. It was kind of like, it was kind of surf, but like, it was kind of fit the times if like, the surf music was like the beach party era, whenever, all these like outlaw bikers came along, then they just added like this like really like discordant like fuzz on top of the same kind of beats, and I'm a fan of that.
I'll have to check that out.
He did a lot. Sundays did a whole, has a couple of compilations of his stuff, and there was the lead single from the Wild Angels movie, which we just watched again recently. We watched a couple of classic Corman directed things after his passing. Yeah, that the blues theme, the character Blue that Peter Fonda plays, that was actually like a top 10 hit in the US. So, and it's just all fuzz guitar.
I just watched Werewolves on Wheels. That's got a great soundtrack. I wasn't expecting that.
That's an odd one.
Felt very oddly modern.
Yeah. No, I saw that one a few years ago at the Alamo here in Brooklyn.
So have you been in New York all your life? Did you grow up there?
I was born here in Staten Island, New York, but I moved down into the deep South as a kid. And my dad was still here, and I would usually spend summers here. And then I lived in a few towns in Mississippi and New Orleans. And then after I graduated college, I lived in Austin, Texas for several years before moving back here. But
How was that?
It was, yeah, Austin was fun. Austin was just on that cusp of becoming the hip city. It was like, so it was, the population was maybe half of what it is now.
Wow.
It was a very different place. I mean, I still have a lot of friends there. We were there last year, and it's a great place. It's just, I mean, it exploded, and a lot of the stuff that I think of as being a big part of Austin are just gone. But it's still cool. It still has its own thing happening, but it's I mean, they just, they keep growing and developing. And
I was doing some illustration work for a poster for Waiting for Guffman. So I was watching it with commentary, and they were saying that it was filmed just outside of Austin. No, not going to remember the name of that either, but it's a town just outside of Austin, like to the north a little bit. And I was just like, we are going to move there. It's just so like small town vibe and historic homes and everything. And it seemed really cheap compared to San Francisco.
Yeah.
And somehow we like ended up trying to rope my dad into it, because we were like, we don't have money for a down payment, but if my dad comes with us, he can like help with that. And that just became a really bad idea. And after like job hunting and putting out the feelers to move out there, he bailed, and we were like, maybe this isn't a good idea anyway. So that was the last of our flirtation with Texas. Have you always revolved around the film world? What was your, upbringing with that?
I was always interested in it. Like most people my age, I was a very small child when Star Wars came out. And, that was, I feel like some of my first memories revolve around that. And then just, science fiction and, all the Star Wars. To me, the Star Wars is the original movie, and all the stuff that ripped it off, and all the bootleg. I think I had a bootleg Star Wars poster from Chinatown hanging in my bedroom, and superhero stuff. And yeah, I was always, even as a child, when I first moved to the South, there was a multiplex about a block and a half away. And I think I saw almost everything that played there for several years. And we had HBO for the first time. I think my uncle had actually figured out how to steal it, which was something you could still do back then. You could see where the plug was and just plug yours in. And and just, I pretty much constantly had my head inside of movies, and I did wind up going to film school. But I did, when I went to Austin, with the goal of getting involved in indie film, I wound up going in all these different directions and worked as a bookseller. But I was still, going to the original Alamo Draft House had just opened there, and and they, were showing, some repertory and like, kind of novel things like 24-hour movie marathons, and doing the kind of thing where they would, showing Goonies in a cave on the outskirts of town with Corey Feldman in attendance, which is pretty scary, and that kind of stuff. But
I heard he might be performance art. Is he a performance artist? Is it all a big ruse?
I mean, on some level, all of life is a performance art. I mean, if you've ever seen like Portrait of Jason, that's like the pretty perfect documentary about, one person having built this persona. But I would say Corey Feldman, if life is a performance, he's one of the the masters of it. I mean, nobody else can do what he does. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah,
he's an expert at being him, just as we are experts at being us.
Mm-hmm. But I never did a sort of a Michael Jackson influence dance routine and turned it into a sideline music career
with all the angels singing backup and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they're like his roommates too, I think.
Oh, are they? Yeah. I mean, Corey Feldman, he was there, Friday the 13th. He was in a lot of oddball movies.
Lost Boys,
yeah. All the, the Corey movies from that, like License to Drive. But yeah, I mean, I guess for people into weird movies, he was the guy who killed Jason, and then he was in Lost Boys shortly thereafter.
For me, it was Will Wheaton. There's that connection with Stand By Me, right? But I really related to Will Wheaton. I think we kind of like almost looked the same at that age. We were the same age. Maybe even we still are the same age.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not influenced by Corey Feldman, and I hate to think that we're just using him as a punchline because so many do, but it is just one of those kind of things. But no, I mean, I guess, yeah, after that, I moved back to New York with, to finally really start being serious about doing film stuff. And I started, I was both working at Kim's Video, running their book section. I was like the co-head of their book department. And I started freelancing mostly in bad TV around the same time. I worked on Emerald Live for several years on and off, and a lot of cooking, but also, all sorts of what was happening around, just, it was a lot of fun that time. I was working almost around the clock, usually like 90 hours a week, because I was mostly, doing full-time hours at Kim's and full-time hours freelancing on the side. And I did a little of everything from like, America's Most Wanted to, so it was cool to just go all over town and sort of be able to get into weird buildings and see, it was fun.
Oh, I bet. No, I always thought that if I had another go around, it would be nice to have at least a stint for a while in New York City. I never got a chance to live there or anything, but it seems like there's just, a lot more opportunities to get into stuff like that. It's always been a dream of mine to like somehow be in a writing room for comedy writing. And there's some late night that goes on there, Daily Show and whatnot.
And that's fun. And those things are all, I mean, yeah, it seems like that there's not nearly the amount of people watching those kind of things, but they're still in production, and there's still a good bit of studios. I mean, a lot of the studios, because I ran some stages here in New York for a while, mostly I feel like more of them are indies. I did have a chance once to go probably near the tail end of their existence to ABC's soap opera studios. I was working with this DP who did a lot of pickup ENG stuff for TV, and we did a little piece about the soap opera, world. And it was crazy. There would be like these long corridor of each stage would be like, here's like the sexy rooftop and here's the sexy bedroom. And they just had like cranes and a hole, and they would just push it from one to the other. It was a huge, I mean, I can't even imagine that existing now. The real estate and operation of that thing, because I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's many soap operas in production left, and probably not in New York.
So it was almost like assembly line filming.
Oh yeah, no, I mean they were. They had it. I mean, they basically had to have all the different sets so they could move quick. They could go from one scene to the next, and it was all lit. And they just pushed the crew down from one part to the other. But there is more. Netflix built those massive stages right down the street from the stages I used to run, and they opened right after I left that place. So they opened right as we were going into COVID. And I'm not really sure. I mean, it seems like Netflix is still the one that still understands how to make money. I mean, it seems like a lot of the streamers are struggling, but Netflix has, I think Netflix has that sort of cachet that, there's like it's a generational thing of people who I think can't ever imagine living without Netflix.
That's true.
Yeah.
You are, seems like you've gravitated towards more of the outsider kind of stuff though, right? Like just kind of looking at the clips that you put on Instagram.
Oh yeah.
Where do you fit in with all that? Where does that stuff come from?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in the sort of outer limits of weirdo filmmaking, even though some of my personal tastes aren't, can be a little more refined, so to speak. But I started to see a dearth of that kind of stuff. When I was running the stages, most of the indie films that came through, and a lot were interesting and a lot were very good. I mean, I'm a producer on many of those movies. But it all seemed to be kind of going for a middle ground, which didn't really used to be the case for New York indies. I mean, New York indies used to seem to be pushing the more extreme limits of things, even when they were, the kind of movie that would go to Sundance. And I've always been interested in this stuff on a personal level, but just seeing that there needs to be like a new sort of transgressive cinema, and working with people like Mike Diana and Nick Zed and people who have been sort of associated with that, and just seeing that I think that people respond to that kind of stuff. And I also just feel like the world needs, I do kind of think that things started to move into this like very kind of middling, centrist sort of, middle of the road. And I think the streaming world has done it worse than anything, where it's like the idea of like least objectionable programming, which was something, a concept you learn in like early media studies classes, is exactly what they went for with streaming, because it's the whole model is to just get people to keep their eyes on it all the time. Um, or not even keep their eyes on it, to keep it going while they have their eyes on a secondary device, which is actually what something is going for. So I don't know. I just like the idea of getting like, kind of, some of the more unusual people and filmmakers and getting them together in a room and actually watching something and making stuff. And, we had the opportunity to like, with someone like Zed to, do a couple of things with him and try to give him a higher production value than he had before. I mean, I had studios, and a friend of mine who was like in the camera union that worked on Gotham came and shot, Nick Zed for us. And he was very happy with that stuff. And the same, he shot a little Mike Diana mini doc that I did too. And so and there was a few other kind of old school underground people that we did some things for, with kind of an eye towards like, oh, how can we make this a little bit more legit but still be that sort of thing. And then some younger people that I'm still working with, Josephat Conception and Twigs Gory, who we had screened Mono no Aware for this big screening series I did. And he brought both of them because they had taken 16 millimeter classes, and they both like played like early John Waters and early Kenneth Anger in this really amazing way. And I was like, wow, so there are people doing this kind of stuff, and it's, on the margins in every possible way. And so I just, wanted to start really pushing that kind of stuff, avant-garde to, the outer limits of alternative lifestyles, and or just the people who have spent their lives obsessed with this kind of stuff. And I mean, there's a huge group of those people, but I do worry that sometimes even like some of these great labels that I buy a lot of their stuff, that you're putting out these crazy movies, like when they're working on new stuff, it always seems to move back towards the middle of the road. And I see it where that can sometimes be an issue even up here in northern Manhattan. A lot of the art people, and I know them, are very conservative, and I don't mean politically. I mean, they're not conservative politically, but conservative as far as the kind of stuff they're willing to show and support.
Right. Yeah, I was just watching a documentary about modular synths called "I Dream of Wires."
I know about. I haven't seen it, but
They're just talking about the beginnings of synths and the two different sort of schools of thought or philosophy on how they're going to be created and what they're going to be for. And there was sort of the East Coast and the West Coast versions, and the East Coast was Bob Moog, and he ended up listening to what musicians wanted and creating a product that kind of made sense and could be controlled with a keyboard and everything, and could be kind of understood. And the West Coast people, like out of Berkeley or something, San Francisco, were just making these giant machines that would just make these crazy sounds that nobody's ever heard before, but it was all very kind of out of control and wasn't specifically musical. It's good to have the experimental stuff too, but I think on that front, it maybe just was going too far.
I mean, there's always, yeah. I mean, I enjoy really free form music. I know some people that from the noise community and stuff, and there's all these crazy sound generators, and I mean, I think there's something to it, especially with experimental film. Things that aren't necessarily, the artist isn't really in control. It's like the artist is sort of just, and the sort of harnessing technology, or the technology's harnessing them. I was thinking about Bob Moog a lot recently, actually just in the last couple of days, because I was thinking about, just with what's the way, just going back to film being a communal experience, that he had said later, that if he would have known that, his inventions would have made it to where people would play music by themselves instead of as a group, he might not have done it. Because he thought that music was a communal thing, and he thought he was just making this really radical instrument, not something that could be harnessed to where you can eliminate the rest of the musicians around you. I mean, and we are kind of in a place where a lot of music is created in like a solitary environment.
Sort of seems like Lucas's dream, to be able to cut out as many people besides you, the creator, as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and there's something to that. We're now like entering, AI filmmaking, where, it might be possible within a couple of years. I mean, the tech might be there now. They just want a fortune for it, that someone could conceivably make a feature film, by themselves, with what appear to be actors with just a keyboard and one computer.
Everybody's definitely got feelings about it. It'd be interesting to hear what you think about AI in general. Is it its own art form? Is it dangerous? What is it?
I mean, I'm not really qualified. I've played with it some. I tried to get, when they first released Chat AI, and my biggest problem with it was that it was so censorious. You couldn't even get it to do something PG rated, and that was the case with almost everything. But I figured out that there were some prompts that you could sort of trick it into doing stuff. So I did have it write a feature length screenplay about erotic space nuns. But it's not good, and it's a terrible writer. You basically had to feed it all the prompts, and it really never made it past anything like a romance novel. And it was hard to get it to do that. And that's one of my worries, is that everybody's so concerned about what's going to happen, that they're limiting it to a thing that, I mean, Sesame Street would seem almost controversial at this point. But I mean, I'm curious to see its usage in film. I mean, I know there was that huge controversy about that. Was it Late Night with the Devil? Did you hear about that?
Oh, I heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah. They had like one or two images that their art director had put through an AI just for like a background thing. And there were some people talking about boycotting the movie because of, its use of AI. And I was like, we've seen, people have embraced all of this tech over several years that have eliminated jobs. It was just weird that was the thing that that they were like, this is where we draw the line.
Yeah, but I think it happens with, like you said, all technology that's revolutionary is going to change what jobs people can have or do have, and what people can create. And, it's just like when photography came out in a lot of ways. But I don't know. I like it for it's hard for me to conceptualize things sometimes.
Yeah.
I feel like my ability to visualize things was like over the top, overflowing when I was a kid, just being able to just like watch my own imagination like it was TV. And, now kind of try to do visuals as a living, and it's not as easy. A lot of times I just need more inspiration and more goofing around and scribbling in order to get anything to kind of gel into something worth looking at. So I like it for the idea of like coming up with the inspiration and then, drawing or painting something based on what you have made in AI, but never done anything specifically that I've worried about trying to recreate, nothing that has gelled that way for me.
Yeah, we've used it a little. We're, very behind schedule on this music video for this punk band that I love, that we were just trying to, there, like my partners moved to Oslo, and it's mostly this Akira style animated thing. And there's this one visualization that I came up with that I was having problems describing. And while I was with my girlfriend's family over the holidays, I was just playing with one of those AI apps, like, and it takes a while, and putting all these prompts into it until I found something. I was like, okay, this is kind of what worked. I mean, and it's not actually going to be, but, it was just a way to visualize. I mean, but I think that, And it took, a long time to do it. And so I could see it being a useful tool. And I've seen, even years ago, we went to PS1 had a show. What is his name? Ian Chang. And he is like a visual artist, and he had done this. It was this installation. It was like almost these kind of video game things, but it was like this auto generating story based. He had written some bizarre text, and then the story was kind of just generating itself on these different screens. And it was like kind of a very primitive AI. And this is just a few years ago, and things have moved so much, but it was really fascinating to see the way that the computer was taking already kind of bizarre things that came from his brain and trying to auto generate them into this like, kind of living video game.
Did you see the episode?
It was great.
First episode of this season of Black Mirror that was about an auto-generating TV show based on somebody's real life. And by the time they lived something for like 10 minutes, it was already happening on TV.
Yeah, no, I haven't, but that
was a mind F. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me about your partner. How did that happen? Where did that relationship come from?
He was, living in this neighborhood when I moved up here. An old friend of mine from Mississippi had went to college with him. And we actually met when I first came to this apartment. He was here. He had some bizarre project where he had been collecting, or his roommate had been collecting junk, and he had been drawing it. And we've just been friends. We played a little music together for a while, on and off. And then I was doing these, when I was working at the stages, I had a little secret cinema going where we were making films with just the people that worked there, with like the janitors, and they were very strange. And I mean, that was the point. It was like, let's just like tell someone you're going to write this and we're just going to make it. And the person who was editing one, was, I don't think could wrap their head around what it was supposed to be. So he was working for a famous comic book artist, from the 60s and 70s, who had done some advertising, and he was kind of the tech guy, Nori. So we started going to his office and editing this film, and then we wound up doing a couple more like that. And as I was doing screenings, and then the Nick Zed thing came around. I did this huge screening series in Bushwick for like 8 weekends every Friday night. And we had this big alley, and we could seat like 275 people. And I got this, 25-foot screen and a projector. It was a lot of work. And we got a lot of people who we had worked with a lot at the stages, and whose work I liked, to every week do a program. And I worked with them to curate things. We had Marcel Zama. I don't know if you know him. He's a real well-known artist. I have a couple of his pieces here. He had done like a Beck album cover. But he's has a fine art career. David Zwerner represents him, and he does some stuff for the subway. He actually designed one of the big ballets here. And he's really well known. He's done some music videos for Spoon and I say Arcade Fire. Arcade Fire did the music for one of the things that he shot at our place, and he was doing like almost these kind of throwback to Silent, and a little bit of Guy Madan. I don't know, but we screened like a total retrospective of his work, and PFR, the guys behind Wonder Chosen and Xavier Renegade Angel, that we'd worked with them a bunch, and we screened them. And Nick Zed had come to our building to have an art show with the Millennium Film Workshop, who was in our place briefly. And I brought the owner of the company to, check the stuff out. And he was very taken with Nick and wanted to buy one of his paintings. And he's like, well, maybe we should produce a film with him. And I said, yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult. And so I talked to Nick about it. And we decided for the main event for this screening series to do a couple of new Nick Zed films that would premiere as part of a career retrospective on the last of 8 weeks. And one was animated and one was live action, but yet I should qualify that by it had like 80 layers of composited things. And we shot that in the stage basically overnight. And then we spent the whole week, editing this thing as I was running the stages, and I was trying to make sure that the screening was together. We barely slept. And Nori was there because Nori, was better at doing effects, and because it was a very effects heavy thing. It's always been as much of like an art project as a production company. Before COVID hit, it was looking to be more of a production company. We had done this big thing for the Green New Deal people and a few things like that. But some of that, some of that has ebbed and flowed since then. He had a little bit of a history with Mike Diana, and we started talking to him about doing some stuff, and a few other people like that. And then these young people that I was like, all right, I have at the time I had facilities, and, and I knew a lot of like kind of pro crew people that were really hungry to do weird stuff because, they just want, I think sometimes after working on, like sort of a mainstream TV show for 8 solid months, and then someone wants to do this really bizarre thing, it's like it's kind of a release. So that's kind of was the impetus for that.
So, yeah, when it comes to like art projects, it feels difficult for me to like share, I guess, right? The work, but also just like the vision or the dream or whatever. Like, how do you? It feels difficult for me to like partner with somebody or even farm out bits of the work. But I guess that's something you get used to.
We're very different. As far as like what, we've been doing a writing workshop with a few of the people we work with, and we have very different ideas about writing. And, we fill incredibly different roles. Nori is kind of like a master illustrator, an animator, and, tech guy, but he works on odd schedules, and I've usually been doing that when we're doing live action. We've done a few little documentary pieces and and if it's like our own project, I've usually done that. But we'll do something like I had done this kind of very odd documentary about this sort of amateur ghost hunter that I used to work with. And, when he's like, oh, let me just do a little animated thing, so, a lot of it is just, and it can also be, there's certain times that there's like a Khloaris thing that only one of us was involved with, but, we still credit it. It's a fairly loose thing. There's been several, I've done a few little documentary things that say Khloaris, even though he might not have been involved. He did like a lot of art for Royal Trucks. He helped with the cover of their Greatest Hits album and a lot of stuff for their videos. And I had little to no involvement in any of that, even though I got some limited edition vinyl out of it. So it's not,
so you're
it's both loose and something, but there are certain times where we're really, when we were doing that Green New Deal thing, especially at the height of trying to get it complete. And he was, we were talking about 2 hours every day to try to, hash through, because sometimes just trying to, it can get difficult where you both have something pretty specific in your brain and you're trying to make it mesh.
But it makes sense to, like, I guess, build the body of work and the brand rather than piecemealing it out between Khloaris and your own like personal website or some other kind of name to point people to. That makes sense.
I have my own personal website. I kind of feel like sometimes if I do need to show that I've been in the legit world, like if there's something that's come up and it's like, all right, I need this to look a little bit more sober. Not that, I just so I have that presence there. But I'm bad about keeping those things updated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me too. At least it's not being done in Dreamweaver anymore. So one thing that we had talked about in our back and forths earlier that was an interesting parallel is the idea of working in the video store. Like we both kind of spent some time doing that.
Well, I was at Kim's Video, which is, I don't know if you know about Kim's.
Not really.
It was there's actually a new documentary. It was just doing the indie theaters. It might be pay-per-view. I'm not sure if it's on one of the streamers yet, but it will be
a thing.
Kim's had been a video store that had opened in the back of like a Korean laundromat in the early mid 80s. Young man Kim, and I believe his brother at the time, and it became really big. They were renting a lot of, at the time, very rare Asian movies, and it did better, I think, than the laundromat. So they they, got rid of the laundromat and just went with videos. And there wound up being several Kims. There was, the original was in the West Village, but the one that became the most well known was probably the one on St. Mark's, in the heart of, the East Village, that he had bought a building there, and it was like multi-story. Like one floor was all vinyl, one floor was video rental, one floor was DVDs, VHS to purchase. And there was also, he had like a little porn section, and he had books. And I came in when I had moved back to New York I had been working at a bookstore in Austin for a few years before, which actually the same bookstore that was in Slacker, the Richard Linklater movie. And I just needed some work, and I answered an ad in the back of the Village Voice. And he brought me in because I guess he didn't think the books were doing that well. So he wanted me to like kind of work with the guy who had been running the book. And I brought in like some remainders, and we did, I was never actually working as of, doing video rental stuff, but, I would sit there on the, the floor while I was pricing or looking stuff up, and, and I would answer questions for people. And also, I talked to a lot of the people who have been had been obsessed with movies for ages. And, there's a lot of kind of notable people who have been in and out of Kim's over the years that have worked there. And there was a huge to-do where they, I guess when he finally closed the last store, he had tried to figure out someone he could give his collection to. Because, that collection it doesn't make sense in the era of the internet and torrenting and stuff. But, they would do things, I think, borrow stuff from university collections or even the Library of Congress and make a bootleg copy for rental. So, it was actually a lot of film professors from Columbia and NYU would say, hey, there's a Douglas Sirk title that I can't see and I need to see it. Kim's would likely have it. It wasn't always on the up and up, but it had probably one of the biggest libraries, and most of it was legit. But a lot of it was stuff that, if somebody thought there was money to be made on it, they would have printed a copy of it. There was a lot. So he wanted to keep that collection together, and he, this is really, someone should watch the documentary. I haven't even watched it yet, but it wound up going to this town in Italy, and I think it just languished there. So now they've gotten it back, and they've put a faux Kim's installation at the Alamo Draft House Theater in downtown Manhattan. So it's kind of odd to walk down there and see like the, all those Kim, and you could buy a Kim's t-shirt. And it was, it was kind of a legendary thing. So many notable people worked there over the years. And at the time, it was like, if you went into a bar in the East Village and like, oh, you work at Kim's, they would basically, everybody knew someone or had worked at Kim's at some point, and they knew that you made no money, so that you barely ever bought a drink. But yeah, Kim's, just being around that collection and having access to it. And and this was not like any typical video store, even though most indie, I think that people always think of video stores as being the Blockbusters of the world, which all kind of had the same collection. Like every indie had like sort of a very unusual collection, but Kim's, I say, more so than anywhere, because they made, if there was something that was a cult item or, desirable to someone somewhere, they tried to have at least a copy of it for rental, whether it was totally legal or not.
Wow. Yeah, I had a similar experience with working at Tower Video in Sacramento. And I was just trying to think back of like, it wasn't the same thing with having some amazing deep cuts collection, but you certainly could see all kinds of stuff there, including like your adult titles. But also I was just trying to think about like what was involved in just going and renting a movie back then. Cause I was there, it was still VHS, and it felt like the time when people were just starting to have to like enter a credit card number, you know what I mean? And people were really put off by that sort of thing a lot. I don't know what they had to do before then, but yeah, it was very like the transition between mom and pop shops and then your Towers and the warehouse and that kind of thing. And then into your giant Blockbusters and Hollywoods. But the thing that was interesting for me back then too is just the characters that you'd work with. And I also worked at Borders Books, and especially with Borders, it was like everybody was sort of in limbo with their life. Everybody was like a psychologist that had just had a mental breakdown and needed to do something else, or a guy that just got out of the military, or, or students, of course. But everybody seemed like they were kind of still trying to figure out some other thing or just take a break from something else. I think there was a retired race car driver, somebody who had to retire early. Everybody was just kind of taking a break from life and they needed to work at Borders Books.
I think that's pretty common in, things like book selling. I mean, Kim's Video, there was a lot of like active musicians, and, there were some students that were going to NYU film school, but there were also guys, because, Kim's, it was a place to meet people, but also they would let people have time off if they wanted to tour with their band. But people also made terrible money, and there were a lot of very disgruntled that kept working there anyway because they couldn't find anything else that made sense for them. But when I worked at the bookstore, yeah, that's exactly. I mean, there was at least a couple of people who had, advanced degrees in education and then decided they hated teaching, and or people who had been high in the publishing world in New York and then wound up in Texas wanting, I mean, it was definitely a place. And even me at the time, I was just trying to figure out for myself. I mean, I would never change anything about those years. I feel like I was continuing my education. It was I ran the film department even at that store, the film book, and we were essentially right across the street from one of the biggest universities, sometimes the biggest university in the country. So we bought used books from the public, and we would buy thousands of books a day. So almost everything would come through our bookstore at some point. And especially if you, I mean, and we did vinyl and CDs and VHS and DVD. DVD was just starting to come in at the time, and I actually, right near the end of my time there, I put my hand in to like clear out the VHS because they just hadn't been moving, and there was like 50 boxes of them. So I did a crazy clearance thing, because we would have things like, 73 copies of Total Recall or something. I was like, unless we mark these down, we're not going to move off. I mean, so that was a great, but Kim's was, I mean, I'd still in touch with a lot of people I knew from that world. My desk was at the one by Columbia University, and that was a slightly different, everybody was into maybe a little more of their idea of highbrow film than what the downtown Kim's, which was, I don't know, it was all over the place. I mean, and some of those guys, there's that, I don't know if you heard of that movie Sweet East that was been playing the indies, that that's directed by a Kim's guy who he'd been DPing, who's been a pretty well-known DP and all that. There's another Alex Ross Perry, who, I worked with. So I didn't know him super well, but I used to see him going to see old movies all the time, and he's directed a bunch of movies now. And I think even that, what's his name, the guy who made Joker, he was a Kim's guy at one point. Nick Zed, who I mentioned earlier, he worked at Kim's for a short time, and he would say he had to rent his own movies to people who he had no idea who he was. I mean, there are a lot of people worked there.
I wish I could, track down people from that era. It was just before, most people had a computer and before all the social media stuff. So those are all, that kind of period gets lost to time, the way that it just doesn't seem to happen that way anymore. Everything's permanent and immediate now.
But it's also a little ephemeral at the same time. It's all like permanent, but also like culture like flows through in almost this stream of consciousness way. Though I feel like the way that people interact with social media is almost ephemeral. It's like they don't go back to it. It's always moving forward.
That's true.
There's no permanence to it, even though it seems like, we hear a lot about, what's going to happen to these kids who are obnoxious on the internet as they become adults. And we're starting to see that. But at the same time, I think the way that people deal with it is almost like this ephemeral. It's like, it's like this flowing, this information and media flows through them, but it's not, I wonder like how our generation would have certain touchstones that we want to return to again and again. And I don't know if that's necessarily a thing.
I guess the thing that bums me out most about it is the awareness that we have of it, and that, you can't sort of be yourself as much as far as like kind of cutting loose or being weird in public. There's always or drunk, whatever it is.
Mm.
There's going to be somebody with their camera out, or it's going to get captured on security, like at that Beetlejuice show a few months ago, right?
Oh yeah.
So you look at these videos of like the parties that would happen in LA for a film release, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure film release, I think is something I was looking at, where like the Go-Go's were there and they were drunk, and
Mm.
and like Billy Idol and Mr. T, they're there and they're drunk, it just like, and they're just having fun. And I just wonder if people they don't get to sort of lose their self-awareness ever. Does that make
I
sense?
think, yeah, no, I think that, I mean, and I think that's been happening for a while. I think there's definitely the idea of being drunk in public is a experience that many people just won't know now because it's just too terrifying to, I mean, but that's a different side of those things. And I guess what I worry about more is that when I see that kind of mentality being reflected in art, that people are scared to like let go of those boundaries within the work that they're making. Because I do think a lot of people are self-censoring in there's certain ways that I feel like I see so many things that seem to just be trying to like check boxes and stuff instead of being like a real, I want to see someone just really unhook their brain and the real crazy stuff come out. I was
Right. Like
yeah.
I tend to even find myself checking to see if like an art form or format, whatever it is I'm thinking about, like with my animations or something, and you kind of check to see if you go on YouTube first to see if somebody else has already done it, or you kind of, you want to categorize it first, where I think people used to be able to kind of just make stuff and not worry
Yeah,
about what it can be categorized as or what your keywords are going to be. you know
sure.
we're in a
I
keyword
think,
first era.
yeah, I think there's so much great stuff being made now. And I sometimes see people, especially people my age, saying that, oh yeah, there's nothing good. It's like, no, there's a ton of it. It's just that there's not really like the way to, the kind of tastemakers and like sort of small scale media that used to really focus on those things doesn't really exist. So it's almost, happenstance. I mean, I can listen to WFMU out of Jersey City and hear over the course of the day while I'm writing or something, and hear like 50 great records that are probably by artists that, did an edition of 500 copies of their album or something. It's, there's so much great, and I think there's a lot of great movies, but I just think that the way that we're finding that stuff is tough. And it's like, there's so much being made and the money is drying up too. So that a lot of the people that are working this hard to do this stuff must be really dedicated to it. So
Yeah. I was just venting about Gene Simmons from Kiss. I saw a clip that, is fairly modern. I'm not sure exactly when it was televised, but it was just like on a TikTok or something. But he was saying, rock and roll is dead. And I'm going to prove it because, there's these stadium shows with Elvis and the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or whatever. And you just don't see that happen anymore. And those bands aren't, that level of band isn't out there anymore. And I don't know. I started listening to my playlist and I was like, well, there's all kinds. I think I was listening to like the Radiohead playlist, on Spotify. So I was bringing up all these other bands that were kind of related. And I was like, there's amazing music being made. It's just that there's a lot of stuff out there for people, first of all, to take in, so that concerts aren't your only option for entertainment.
yeah.
And I guess like the novelty of rock isn't there anymore either. There's nobody being like, wow, what is this sound, that we've never heard before. We got to go to the stadium to check out Elvis. You know what I mean?
I can see where Gene Simmons is coming through. And actually, I want to make one point about Gene Simmons after this. But I can see that, the business end of it, like the big business, has kind of dried up. And like media consolidation is so out of control that, we basically have 3 pop stars. Like, Taylor Swift made like over $1 billion last year. And, artists who were selling 50,000 copies of an album 15 years ago are, losing money doing a tour of like, 300 capacity venues. And I think that it doesn't, I think that people still like that stuff. It's just not, I mean, and Gene Simmons just isn't really going to see it from his perch. I mean, he is filthy rich. I mean, they're selling Kiss coffins for like $80,000. I mean, he's not, I was that band King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard, the Australian group that puts out like 6 albums of like everything from kind of heavy psych to like, fractured pop a year. I've heard that they're doing like tens of thousands in merch every show. And I mean, they have a big record label now in Australia, one of the biggest festivals. They're playing, that Forest Hills Stadium here in New York for 2 days. I mean, they're doing incredibly well, but you wouldn't know it because there's no real music media to talk about it. Gene Simmons has probably never heard of them. And you would think that if we had a functional music industry, they say, okay, this band with this ridiculous name is doing something right. And, if we played their record on the radio, we might get more people listening to our radio station, and they would, I mean, it's better, it raises all ships, but it's happening. It's just all like, they're basically almost secret communities. You kind of have to know about these things. I mean, I do think that he's right in that, that we're just not, I mean, yeah, that the kind of level of success that they enjoyed in the beginning of their career for a young band, where they, can get TV appearances within like a year of their first, like, that Marvel comic and just being like a movie. Yeah. I mean, that's just not really something that's happening. And I think people still like it because if you look at the top earning tours every year, sure, there's Taylor Swift and whoever, Beyonce and a few other like pop stars, but most of it's still stuff like the Eagles and Dead and Company and Billy Joel and stuff like, that's the thing, is like there's a level of fandom that rock and roll really inspired in people that I think that, people are just leaving money on the table with that, because I think that there would be a need for it, but people just, I think a lot of it has to do with media consolidation. The young people working for these companies don't really understand those things.
So you think that if radio stations played the right stuff and expanded what it is that they do, that radio could kind of not be as dead of an art form as it is?
Yeah, no, I think they could absolutely grow. I mean, there's records that people get really excited about. Like, what was the name of that group? Was it Wet Leg? I want to say they're British, and they had that sort of indie, like really, they had that song, Chaise Long, like was a big COVID hit. And, and it got millions of views on YouTube, and they might have just been like a one-hit wonder flash band. But that's the kind of thing, is like, even though the song was obviously like just a bunch of double entendres about like, having sex in college, like a lot of little kids got into it. And, but I was saying that's the kind of thing that, you can build like used to, you would take an artist like Kiss, and you put their first album out, and it's like, okay, maybe it does okay, it gets a little radio play, but they're playing the big clubs, and people love them, and you grow it, and within a few years they were huge. I mean, it was really kind of unprecedented for something so ridiculous. These guys, and the most, these like science fiction sort of sumo costumes or whatever they were doing. I mean, I want to say one quick thing about Kiss, though.
Okay.
About 2 weeks ago, we watched the Kiss movie, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park.
Okay.
And I remember watching it as, a teenager, and was like, this is the stupidest movie that's ever been made. It's unwatchable. But now I think I realize enough to think it's kind of brilliant. I mean, it was made by Hanna-Barbera, and it plays like a Scooby-Doo. It's just so much fun. It's not quite the level of amazing, like, sort of this Zen stupidity that the Ramones Rock and Roll High School, but it's almost there. It's kind of a,
I'll have to check that out. I mean, I think Kiss, I don't know who designed the costumes. I don't know if it was one of the band members.
I think they did it. Yeah, I think they did.
I mean, like on a costume design level, they hit it out of the park, and it's great visuals. I just don't know as far as the music. I just know the one Party All Day or whatever. And
Oh yeah, yeah, rock and roll on it. Yeah,
and that's a
uh,
medium. That's kind of a medium hit, as far as.
it was a pretty big hit. I think it was actually a top 20. The live version. I think it had died as a when they released a studio, but then they put out their and that live album. I think is the thing that really put them over the top. They put so the version from their live album became, I think it was like maybe even a top 10 hit or like number 11 or something. It was huge.
Okay.
When I was a little kid, I was too young to know their music, but one of my dad's buddies gave me the official Kiss makeup kit. And it was just one of those things. They had action figures, they had like a Marvel comic book, and they just looked cool. I mean, and I do think those early Kiss records are a lot of fun. But I mean, you could see why. Yeah, it was just like what a brilliant design. I mean, they looked like, you know, monsters from outer space, or they were superheroes that had, in the movie they, all have superpowers and stuff. I mean, how many bands can claim that?
I mean, I love those bands that have amazing visuals to them, and I guess something like Devo,
Mm-hmm.
there was visuals, and I love the music too. It seemed like Jerry Cassell was more in charge of the visuals and the sort of the
Mm-hmm.
branding and the costumes and stuff. The Residents, great look, so
Mm-hmm.
amazing that they could like stay uh, anonymous for so long. I can't
Mm-hmm.
get into the music.
I like those early Residents records a lot. I mean, I do. And Devo is just, I mean, Devo had its own mythology. I mean, I think Devo makes even more sense now.
Right. Oh yeah. No, they're
Yeah.
proven right now.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, no, I like that kind of stuff. I do think it really like and I think that kind of stuff, it's, you know, it really like, young, I mean, I think people, if people have the opportunity to see it, I think it would scratch something. I mean, it's the same like seeing Star Wars as a 3-year-old kid and being like, oh my God, what is this thing? It was just like, it
Mm-hmm.
totally took over. I just think that's, I remember seeing Quiet Riot, Metal Health, the on probably Night Flight when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I like took the change from my piggy bank and I went and I bought the cassette, because I was so like, had the metal mask and the
Yeah.
the straight jacket, and I mean it's a pretty ridiculous thing, but I do like that, the kind of fantastic music. I'm wearing like a Man or Astro Man
Yeah.
t-shirt right now, and they were, they always had the kind of science fiction, kind of element, playing like really punked up surf music. And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I like them. Yeah, I got into a power pop punk phase for a while in like 2008 to or so. Uh, Started hanging out with Kepi from the Groovy Ghoulies, so he kind of introduced me to that sort of sound.
I saw the Groovy Ghoulies at Emo's in Austin
Oh
once.
wow,
They might have been on a bill with the Donnas. I forget.
we'll have to get him on at some point. That'd be cool.
Yeah, they were fun.
The Donnas, yeah.
The Donnas were fun. Well, let me ask you a question, since
Okay.
how did you get into the whole like posting with your account? I mean, I know, this is about, because I guess I've met a lot of people, artists from around the world that I've done projects with just from, posting on Instagram. How did
Yeah.
that become?
It's was sparked by having worked at Famous Monsters of Filmland. You know that magazine at
Oh
all?
yeah. I mean, the original, they've
Yeah.
relaunched it a couple of times, I
A
think,
couple
right?
times, yeah. So second relaunch was under a guy named Phil Kim and his partner, and so that was who hired me. And I wasn't super familiar with what they did or who Uncle Forey was or anything like that. So but when I saw the ad that they needed a designer, it was like an entry level position, and it was slave wages. But I was like, looking for a job and couldn't really find anything in San Francisco. So it just seemed so much like up my alley of, the subject matter and everything. I was like, oh, this is perfect. So I got a job there and did some video animation type stuff for them and some design work a little bit. Worked my way up a little bit from being an entry level designer, and was briefly like art director, sort of, for like a week. And just like I had put so much like effort and daydreaming and research into like coming up with like a look and a feel for all their like products and the magazine and mostly the merch and everything, and like color schemes and freshening up the logo and everything, and even coming up with ideas for like new things to do. Like we could have new characters that are based on the old kind of characters that would show up in the magazines, the old masks of the witch and the shock monster and stuff. We could keep coming up with new, characters. We could have like more modern artists do the covers. Like, it could be like Skinner or Alex Pardee could do covers, and get some color in here. And they hated all of my ideas. They just like, not even like, just like dismissed it. It was just like I put together this whole presentation and look and feel a lookbook kind of a thing, and the second in charge was like, "Okay, I'll show it to Phil and we'll talk to you later about it." And they just never brought it up again. And that was kind of basically the end of me directing any sort of art there. And then things went afoul with them shortly after all that. And I left thinking like, man, that really like got me like excited about the kind of like, it was sort of like the part of my past that I wasn't thinking very much about, of growing up watching John Carpenter movies and all the clones of those kind of movies, and renting, post-apocalyptic movies every weekend, and Elvira hosted movies and all that kind of stuff. So I just was like thinking about it, like, what would I do that could be my own version of what I wanted to do for Famous Monsters? I'll just do that for myself or something else. So I started playing around with this idea of calling something smelly monsters. It's like directly making fun of them, but in like a childish way. That was dumb. But I was just drawing these like monsters that were kind of childish and stinky looking. That ended up being a coloring book called Monster Funk that I put out a few years ago. And I came up with Cheap Chills because I wanted to like tell people about all these movies that I had been watching through streaming services, mostly monster movies and ghost story movies and sci-fi and stuff. So I was just watching all this stuff because I was unemployed, and I was like, I want to tell people about these movies and like how to, rent them and stuff, or watch them for free, cheap. And that was about it, because I'm awful on camera. And so I had briefly thought about making some kind of YouTube show where I would like sit and host and talk about movies and stuff, but that didn't fly. So I just started posting stuff from, either the deep cut images from Famous Monsters magazines that I had, to just other found images and stuff like that from the internet and stuff, and just kept trogging, is that a word? Slogging along with it for a long time. And it just started really picking up maybe 2 years ago with getting followers. But
I mean, I think trogging might work, because Trog is that monster movie with Joan Collins.
Oh yeah,
right? Which is actually a lot of fun, that movie. Yeah. No, it's I like it. I think that, and I think that we've seen each other's accounts, because I mean, I don't do something totally similar, but there's some crossover. And I think that kind of monster kid, or those, I mean, what we were just talking, I think that it still resonates. It's there's, like those, there's certain, even obscure images that nobody knows what they're from can just like really, resonate with people.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. And like, with once you start to get some followers, people will explain what the image is, or they'll ask what it is, and then I'll do a reverse image look up and get some information to tell them about it. And it kind of, it's it's fine to learn about stuff, but it kind of spoils the mystery of it. I like taking in movies. I like to think of it as like taking it in like a child would, because I've never really been great at like reading credits or thinking about who directed most of the movies that I check out, or who's acting. I just fully drink them in, like suspend the disbelief and take them in, and maybe not want to know anything about the behind the scenes stuff. So that's kind of what I end up presenting to the world.
That's the best way. I mean, I do read the credits and think about that stuff, but I do try to I try to not know anything about a movie before I see it. I don't want to know, I don't want to watch the trailer. I don't want to read a synopsis. I just want to go in totally cold and just like let it envelop me. But then I do read about it afterwards, usually.
Well, sometimes you got to, figure out what the hell happened. I've also just been kind of trying to unpack this like psychological question of what is the connection between, well, maybe you could call it horror or the window between truly horrifying movies to down to your B movies and schlock kind of stuff, art creation and anxiety. And there's this sort of circular relationship that they all have for me, especially in the last few years, that I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain, but you know, there's a risk for me in watching horror movies. There's like a dance, a little tango of like, is this going to be too much for me? Am I going to get fucked up over over watching it? Am I going to start ruminating and looping the worst parts of this movie in my head instead of being able to sleep? Am I going to be thinking about it weeks and weeks later? It can kind of like mess up my life for a while if I see something too that resonates too much with me, that I don't know, that clicks as being too horrible to have seen or whatever. But then there's also the stuff that isn't going to horrify me, that's like, like a Hammer movie, most stuff from a few decades ago, there's not going to be any risk of it horrifying me. And then that's almost like, it's very comforting to watch that stuff. And so that's why I don't know a lot about what goes on with your more modern movies, because I mostly watch old stuff because I find it comforting. Like the world looks like it did when I was growing up in the 70s, and everybody's hair looks more familiar and the cars look more familiar, and it's just people walking around in castles or whatever. That's very comforting for me. And then it becomes a way of sort of escaping from the stresses of actual life. Sometimes if things are going really bad with the family, I'll just like get into bed and put on Spectre Man or something.
Oh yeah, we watch it. I mean, we had just watched a gothic horror last night, The Black Torment, but we watch a lot of gothic horror and, Hammer and even early like Universal and that kind of, I mean, there is a very comforting thing, but we watch some modern stuff. And I mean, I don't know that I ever find anything to be too, I mean, I definitely see some extreme stuff sometimes, but I mean, honestly, like the kind of stuff that, moving into anxiety, I think I told you this in that email, that the first horror movie that I recall seeing, and I know the first one that I saw in the theater, was House of Wax with Vincent Price in 3D, when they had that brief 3D, renaissance in 1980 to about 1983. They had re-released it, and it scared when she hits him and the wax mask comes off and you see his like disfigured, and I was like, what, 6 years old or something, and I had nightmares about that movie for at least 2-3 weeks. But you know what? I mean, I kind of find it to be kind of a formative experience. I think when I first watched the original Halloween when I was about 12 or 13, I had a similar, because I found that incredibly terrifying when I first watched it all the way through. I mean, but yeah, I mean, but I do find it kind of I mean, it's like one of those things. It's like kind of embracing the unknown, like the kind of the subconscious.
Yeah.
I don't know. I enjoy it. So I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I kind of treasure some of those sort of experiences.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's weird that when you're a kid, you don't know for sure the different ways people could die or disappear, or could somebody melt away, or, if you pour water on them, or could you just shrivel up into a bunch of dust and smoke, or you would kind of, that would be what would be horrifying, is like, could your parents just like dissolve into tar, or have their head break open into wax, or it's not knowing like how life and biology and all that works, and how kind of really tough we actually are, everything feels like very scary because you're just not sure if the movie is showing you something that could actually happen to you or a family member. And I guess that's where, yeah, I love that stuff now, from when I was a kid. But if something like that happens now, where I'm watching a movie, it will be something very realistic that could happen. And it's like, oh shit, I could be in this situation. And if we were, we would do that. And then look what happened to the people that did that. They're all dead. The whole family's dead because, so that kind of stuff will stick with me now.
I think one thing about a lot of, even sometimes movies I think are very good, a lot of modern horror that gets to both me and my girlfriend, are they're just so humorless. I mean, they're just can be so grim, and and just this unrelenting, there's none of the, like a gothic horror, even when it's very dark, there's like a charm, and there's like this kind of, there's a they kind of build this hypnotic world. And there's just kind of this unrelenting, just brutality of life that nobody even ever smiles. And a lot of, like that it works sometimes, but I feel like that it's most, or I mean, I guess you do have the other side where there's like these comedic horrors that are like these kind of sophomoric, like junior high, which is like the other side of the coin, where it's like, not meant to be taken seriously at all.
And then it's like often splatter humor, it's like, oh, it's over the top gore as a joke, which isn't
There's
the same kind of humor.
Yeah, it's odd to me because being, the age that I am, remembering all the controversy around, that gore effects in the 80s when, they could barely get those movies into the theaters. I mean, they basically had to release like Friday the 13th movies with, almost no blood because the MPAA was not allowing it. And now, one episode of Walking Dead is like, has more gore than the whole Friday the 13th series put together. And it's like, just kind of like considered family entertainment. And I think that's fine. I saw Jonathan Ross a few years ago writing an article where I guess he had been perturbed by the mainstreaming of gore and thought that maybe the British government needed to crack down on it. And I was like, no, we don't need that. I mean, but it is just funny to think that these things that used to be considered really, that freaked, kind of middle Americans out, is now, just the most accepted thing.
I don't know. When you were saying the bleakness, I just watched night before last. It Comes at Night. Have you heard of that one?
I think we watched that one.
About basically like the pandemic. It was filmed in 2017, 3 years before we actually sort of had experiences like it, but it felt very, parallel to things that actually we were concerned with in, 2020 and beyond here, making sure you don't get the germ, you don't get sick, wearing the masks.
No, I haven't seen that one, but I'll put it on my list.
And then it was the same kind of thing where there were some light moments, but there wasn't any humor. And then, not to give anything away, but it was bleak. So by the time it was over, it was just like, man, that was an amazingly made movie. It was like very well shot and the acting was great. And, I could follow it. There was, no problem with the movie, except that I didn't have a good time watching it, I guess, as it was over. I was like, wow, that was so bleak. I don't feel very good after watching it. And I guess that's what I mean about the risk. And especially, if they're depicting things that you're worried it's going to happen to your family or something, it can be pretty tough on me.
Yeah, no. And I think that's, a lot of modern movies in general, they don't really ever seem to be, made where someone wants to replay it. Whereas like sort of 80s pop cinema, like, people watch, those horror movies from the 80s over and over again. There was a certain, something about the way the music played, and he's like, as, horrible as they got, it still was something that was, teenagers loved, the slasher movie that, like Siskel and Ebert and the, League, the Catholic Legion of Decency and all these people thought they were going to destroy all of humanity. But it was just like teenagers liked seeing other teenagers like, get high and smoke pot and get killed. It was just like it was like a game.
Yeah, and they get killed in these over the top, more and more ridiculous ways where you can have a laugh about it, like, oh, gross, and everybody yells. And if somebody's being impaled by like a tennis racket or something, it's just, or what if somebody like was impaled? I just pictured like maybe they get stabbed and then their face gets like grated by the tennis racket itself. That'd be good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, no, I mean, I remember going to see Friday the 13th movies in the theater, and like the way that people would yell at the screen and stuff. It was fun. It was a.
So what's next? There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about here.
Oh, sure.
I haven't seen Ghost Team yet, but now I've got it on the short list. Oh, yeah. But I saw that on your list of stuff on your demo reel.
Oh yeah.
What did you do for that?
I didn't have much to do with the movie at all. That was when I was running the stages. Basically, the producer of the movie, or I guess maybe did I meet the director first? It's just one of those situations where, they had some funding for a movie, but they just didn't. It's one of the an exec or a co-executive or executive producer credit where they came, basically they needed to find a place to shoot that wasn't going to destroy their budget. And we maybe had a little bit more to do with that one than some of those kind of executive producer credits that I have that, because they gave us the script and their pitch package, and I think they might have already had a lot of those stars attached. So it was one of those things that it was kind of just on us to see if we could figure out if we could find a place to stick them where it wasn't going to hurt our business, and, and it would make sense for them. And, and we just kind of negotiated a credit, we went to the premiere and stuff, but, as far as a day-to-day, yeah, I have several credits like that, which I do have on my reel just because, they're kind of, it's notable that, and it is, I mean, I guess sometimes, a lot of things that I've produced myself, or especially for my company, sometimes, I was, I'm there the whole time. Sometimes I edited them. Sometimes I directed certain parts of them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or sometimes I I did like a rewrite or something. But but there's also sometimes it's just making a deal, and I did a lot of that kind of stuff that, to figure out how, or if someone just, was not going to be able to do what they needed to do, say, look, we can try to figure out a way to get you into a stage if you can work with us on the time. We can, try to use some of our resources, or, use our connections to get you a good price on, your grip and lighting package. And it was nice. It's nice to see your name on a movie that has like Amy Sedaris, who I'm a fan of,
Huge fan. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I've met her a couple of times, just like I met her. I mean, I talked to her for a second at that premiere. Also, that show, The Heart She Holler, that was on Adult Swim, that she was in. That was also the PFR people who they shot that at our place, which was a very fun experience because they're all so nice, and they're all like a bunch of, wildly creative weirdos who just like they, work super low drama and do the weirdest stuff, and you work so much with like people doing reality or something that just all seem to hate their lives. And then, you have people doing something really crazy. And they're all like the sweetest people in the world. It's
they're in it for the right reasons.
Yeah. You like go into the stage in the morning and there's like a stack of Patton Oswalt corpses right next to the door. And it's like, all right, I guess they're going to be killing him again today. Yeah. Or like, and they've got like 15 people boiling, fake intestines for, some, no reason. But that's cool. No, Ghost Team is cool. I mean, but I do, some of those, I do have some, the classic executive producer credit where you're just kind of, and there's some of those I've had a little more to do with, I've helped some people scout locations or, recommended crew people, but it's not the same as when I'm producing my own thing and I'm, putting together the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah. A couple things I want to ask you about. First, was Justin Long in that movie Barbarian about the rental home that had the like torture chamber underneath.
Yes.
Have you seen that one?
I did.
Yeah. Was he the barbarian? Is that why it's called that? Or is you kind of supposed to wonder who the barbarian is in that one?
I think it's maybe I think that maybe is implying that it's both him and the I guess the man who had all of those children, right? That I think that it might be comparing those two people.
Yeah, it's almost like the torturer guy was almost like a red herring, like, oh, he's the barbarian. And then by the end, you're like, oh, shit, it's the movie star guy. He's like kind of worse in a lot of ways, like just doing whatever it takes to like preserve
To
himself.
survive, yeah. I don't know if I would say that that's worse than what the guy
Right. Well,
who had built, who had
it's all
spent like
relative.
decades, doing some very disgusting and pretty far-fetched things. That's an interesting movie. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, and it also got me thinking about like, the aspect of producing, and like I was telling you earlier about like teaming up with people is something that I don't have as much experience with. But I've got like my animation projects and stuff that I'm working on, and one idea is to make sort of a like 5-minute pilot based on the main character. That's like my little logo on Instagram. His name's Grigor. And I don't know, like if I were to do something like that, I don't know if I should like kind of get whatever budget I get and put that toward like having a producer, somebody who can make sure things get done, or if that would kind of be more my role and I'd farm things out. But
I mean, what have you thought about doing with the character?
well, so far I've done these little short videos where the guy introduces movies or talks about a movie, kind of like what I was talking about, how Cheap Chill started.
I've watched a couple of those the things that you've done with that.
Yeah, so I want to kind of expand on that, and I kind of picture it being about this kid who's like between 13 and 16, and he doesn't go out very much, but he loves old weird movies, so he like becomes a horror host, and he kind of does his own sort of public access or VHS, version of being a horror host. Kind of picture it being like the Muppet Show, where there's some behind the scenes stuff that goes wrong and weird horror host show from the attic of this kid's house. So I just
Would
been
there?
go ahead.
Well, real quick, would there also be? Would you show a movie too? Would it also function as a horror host thing?
That's one of those things that I'm leaning towards that because
yeah.
because you can do that. Like on YouTube, I could have a 5-minute thing that introduces, and if somebody wants to watch the whole movie, you could just do a public domain movie from there, and maybe poke your head in every once in a while with a couple more little clips, just like they do with the horror hosted show.
Yeah, I think the horror. I mean, people are into that. I mean, like the last drive-in with Joe Bob has been doing very well. We're friendly with a couple of the people who work on that show, and yeah, I mean, it seems like that he's more popular now than he's ever been, and that's probably one of the biggest things that Shudder has going for it. So I think that, and I think that might. Like I think that showing it in real time the way they do, like where instead of it just being dumped onto like streaming, they actually on like what is it, Friday nights it's like live.
And people are hanging out with the comments and everything.
Yeah, or I mean, yeah, you can go and I think they tweet and stuff, but people actually are watching it in real time. Like linear television. And I think there's still something to be said for those sort of events, like a sporting event where that everybody knows that there's a big group of people. And I think Shudder, the first few times they shut, they crashed Shudder's server. Like they tried to do that first marathon, and they've had that issue before. They tried to shoot the original pilot season of that at my stage, and I became friendly. I mean, I knew some of them, I guess, already. Like a lot of them were like trauma people, and I've done whenever when I was working at the stages, whenever someone who I knew from kind of weirdo film underground would come my way, I'd be like, all right, let's make this work somehow. I was like, because it's like if it's Lloyd Kaufman and trauma, it's like I know you don't have any money, so yeah. It's just
he's rolling in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. But the thing with the horror host too, though, is that it's really hard to get anybody to, I mean, obviously, why would it be easy to get people into something new? But it feels harder than you would ever expect to get something new in front of people and have them have any interest. Like, it seems like you got your Joe Bob Briggs and your Elvira and
Mm-hmm.
Svengoolie. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
Svengoolie a year or two ago brought on some new characters and, wanted to see if maybe somebody could take over the reins someday. And it seemed like the fans on social media were just like, "Oh, how dare you? We don't want to see anybody new."
Yeah.
But it's
No,
just
I
like,
mean,
dang, I don't
well,
know.
that's, yeah. I know. I think that, people will accept things, but yeah, sometimes it seems almost arbitrary. I mean, there's a lot of dumb luck in, getting, selling the new thing to somebody. But I mean, that's one of the things I've wanted to focus on with Khloaris is, trying to build new communities. I feel like that the most of the existing venues for entertainment are just like have kind of failed in their purpose. So I think the place is there that you can, you know, if you build the right venue for it, people will go, you know what I mean? They will
Yeah.
go for it. I mean, when we were doing our screening stuff, it was astounding showing some really weird stuff that we had a huge group of people that just came every week. And then when they would come to most stuff I would do afterwards. I haven't been doing as many screenings, but I think that, yeah, you can build an audience. And I mean, you obviously already have an audience built on I mean, it's just like, I think people have to stick with it. I see so many projects that have potential, but then people get discouraged after a couple and then kind of give it up
Yeah.
before they get on their feet. Yeah.
That's something that I struggle with. I mean, I a few years ago figured out that I have ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like not treated or anything like that. So I still struggle with like getting excited about something and working on it, and then if there's a roadblock or something I didn't think of, or I get a new idea, I almost completely forget about the last thing that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to like kind of keep going with something long enough for it to become something. But yeah, what I found too though is I've have my notes apps, and I've found that the good stuff, the good ideas, I've written down like 12 different times and over the last few years, and not realized that I've written down the same ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So they do bubble up back up, and you just can't kind of
Yeah.
keep at
No,
them.
I think that's you. Yeah. No, I do. I use that notes app religiously, and the same reminders. Like I'll think of something. I've gotten to where my girlfriend's just used to me sometimes saying something absurd into my. It's like I take a note in Siri and then I put it into notes, and yeah. Oh, I think that's fine. I have thousands of things in various states of sometimes I'll think about something and I'll write the bones of it, but then I'm working on a different project, and I just try to make sure that I keep my notes in one place that that I don't forget any of what I was thinking about with it, because you can't work on everything all the time.
You can't. And I don't know, like there's the aspect of social media where you might become discouraged from lack of interest faster than if you didn't have that input, you know what I mean?
Mm.
but yeah, the good ideas stick around and you keep going through them. I had this visual metaphor of it all from the days when me and my wife would smoke weed, and it was like I think that's might be what kind of awoke the idea that, like, oh, I might have some kind of attention deficit issues or something like that, because when I was smoking, there would be like this amazing idea at like the top of a Ferris wheel, you know, and then it would disappear and I'd be like, oh God, it's gone. But then some other interesting idea would come, and then that would go away. And then after like 40 minutes, that first good idea would come back. And I was like, oh, it's all circular.
Mm.
The good ideas you don't have to panic when they go away, because they will come back. Meanwhile,
Mm.
you can kind of keep working on each one as they go through the Ferris wheel of your brain. So I think that's just kind of an accelerated version of what goes on in my brain anyway. So I try to like live with that, when I'm sober now.
Oh yeah. Well, I similar. Yeah, I have. I think that it's sort of like they say, if you try to remember your dreams, if you write them down and you make a note. I don't do this, but I've heard that you can remember. You know what I mean? You can start to remember them if you consciously say. But I guess with ideas, it's the same. Like when something comes to me, it's like, okay, I need to remember that. I've gotten to where I do try to use technology to, when I have an idea to say it. I think the big trick for me and for most people is finishing those ideas. You know what I mean? It's having a great idea is one thing, but like making a full-fledged feature film or a TV show out of something is like expanding it and putting in a ton of work. I know I had mentioned that band, the King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard, earlier. I had read an interview with the main guy, because they do so many things and like all these different, and he's like, I don't have any more ideas than anybody else. And he goes, I just do everything that I think of. And I was like, which is just a sound. I mean, he's a good bit younger. I mean, he's probably maybe 30 or 32. But that's just sort of an astounding thing. I mean, sometimes they put out like 6 fully realized albums in a year that are all pretty radically different than the last one. And there's something to be said for that. It's like, someone's just doing it.
Yeah, no, I've seen that, how the difference between, but especially like with funny people, like people who do sketch comedy or stand up, whatever. The difference is I think we all think of the worst idea for a situation, or wouldn't it be ridiculous to do this or that, or what if we, this kind of stuff. Most people, like 99.9% of us, go, anyway, that would be funny. And then they go back to doing what's normal and expected. But if you go, well, why don't we just do that? Like actually take the time to produce that thing, or bring that thing out into public or whatever. The fact that you put that effort into making it a reality can make it funny.
Have you seen or heard about Hundreds of Beavers? Or is it? Oh man, we watched it before we got a copy, like screener kind of thing, and I guess these guys went to NYU or something, and they'd made a couple of films, but it's this like black and white, mostly silent, or at least not with dialogue. It's somewhere in between like Looney Tunes and Terry Gilliam's Monty Python animation, and like maybe like sort of the game mechanics of like a Nintendo game, and like just a lot of like silent comedy. And it's just this, it doesn't seem like it should work. It's this really goofball comedy, and it's like guys in beaver suits, and there's like all these recurring situations. But I saw it and I was like, I just loved it. I mean, I was like, this is the kind of thing that, should be like, should have a huge cult following. It's just a tragedy that it doesn't. And within weeks of us seeing it, it played IFC, and they had like the guys in the beaver suits fight, and it got like a big write-up in the New York Times. And now within a couple of months, it looks like it's going to be a bona fide underground repertoire, or like indie cinema hit. And and I was like, they did, and it looks like it was an enormous amount of work to do for this. I think they maybe had $100,000 budget. When you get a chance to see it, I mean, it's probably not to everybody's taste, but it's just this ridiculous, weird thing that they said, all right, we have this idea and we're gonna do this. And it is the kind of thing that right when I saw it, I was like, this should be a cult classic. I mean, maybe just it'll take time, but it didn't take that long. So I think there is an audience. A friend of mine that I go to see weird movies with, his much younger kind of like Zoomer brother, said he went to see it when it played at IFC and just loved it. And I was like, yeah, so this kind of thing can like sort of, I think that it's the kind of stuff that people still want, that sort of experience. It's just the right weird thing that I think it just takes time to get it out there. But it's astounding. I'm really happy that that it seems like it's going to be a hit. And I think that it's the kind of thing that people want. It's like, just like it's individual. You get when you watch the movie, more than anything, you get the idea. It's like, these are people that made this movie. It's like, it's like, doesn't seem like any other thing.
Yeah. I think anything that's truly innovative, you're going to get just like all maybe all pushback from people around you being like, you can't do that. It reminds me of like Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie. I may have been smoking when watching that one too, but I just was watching it thinking, you can't do that. You've broken movies. And it was just like blown away by like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is a movie. They seem to have like completely dismantled. I was like, people aren't gonna be able to make any movies anymore after this. I was trying to talk my family into having like my son is just turned 7, and I was like, it would be so funny if every kid's got to have a themed birthday. If we just like it as a joke, the theme of your birthday would be like me, like my dad. I love my dad, and like my picture would be on his cake, and there'd be like balloons with my picture on it, and I just want to see all the parents from school showing up, and the house looks like that with my face everywhere. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely been behind doing ridiculous parties and ridiculous. I mean, when we, at the stages I used to have for any occasion, a ridiculous party for that we would do like these elaborate flyers for just internally. And that's what kind of grew into doing these weird staff movies that, where again, they were the most, I'm really proud. I've kept those things pretty private, but, yeah, it's just kind of an astounding, it's just, yeah, it's just great getting people together to make something. They're just doing it. And playing for that audience. And some of it I think would play. Ryan, who wrote and directed one, has definitely shown the one that he did a few places. I think it even played at that Joe Bob, his first like drive-in festival. It's a short, so.
And so you've hosted like screenings, you said, and they're like in back alleys and sort of makeshift theaters.
Yeah, mostly I've done some that are in, I guess rarely in a real movie theater setting. The last ones we did were even kind of like bars that had a projector, but we were mostly, I had acquired I got this huge screen for a great price, like one of those, like those kind of ones at the near pro level that like it takes like 3 people like an hour to build it. It's a real pain. And we had a projector and folding chairs, and we were in this industrial area, so I figured that we could do this. Sometimes we did some of them as almost like secret parties and just got like some people, like everyone involved. We did like some of the Nick Zed stuff. We screened at some of those and other people's films, and some that were we did like mostly free admission. I wasn't like trying to make any money on them, and just inviting unusual people to do it, and we got a lot of press. We had like a feature in Vice magazine when we did the Marcel Zama thing, and yeah, it was fun. It's great doing something in those spaces, even though right now thinking about it, we were doing it all summer. It's just the amount of work to build it and then tear it down. Plus, when you're trying to keep a mind on making sure all the tech stuff works, because I was I would go and introduce the film or whoever was doing it, and then I would go back and I'd run the projector and the PA and stuff too. But,
yeah, that's a lot. Have you ever done something more like where you like rent out a theater space and kind of have a curated show, kind of like more like Alamo Draft House kind of a event?
I haven't really. I've thought about doing it some. Mostly, I've like doing these as like a free thing. I'm trying to pick it up. One of the like a composer that we work with who's been doing a lot of stuff wants to do this thing. So I've been trying to put it together, and I've thought about doing a little tour with a few of the films that are like ours and some friends. A couple of places have reached out to me about doing that. So I've mostly been focused right now on trying to get a couple of screenplays in shape to hopefully get them produced. And that's been kind of my main goal, is because we're in this to make movies. I like showing movies and stuff, but sometimes you realize you expend so much of your energy doing all that, like posting and like doing screenings and stuff, that you're not as focused on what you're really trying to do, which is make movies.
Yeah. So like a full length kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
That's
we have
cool.
A few things, like one of the kind of, well-known underground artists we work with. I've been working on a screenplay with him that hopefully will be in a position that I can get some people to read it. I mean, there's a couple of drafts, and and then there's a few other things afoot that, and I know so many people that are, in this world, not just here, but, like the guy who does all the big production stuff in Mississippi is an old roommate of mine. And I know he's sick of doing ad stuff. And so, I mean, the Mississippi Film Commissioner I went to film school with, and she's, there's a lot of, I think, and people want to do this kind of stuff. I think it's just figuring out how to do it and, make, or not have everybody lose their shirts doing it too.
Yeah.
We all have to make a living.
Getting the money figured out early on seems to be kind of a key thing to.
Well, that's one of the reasons I think doing the screenings and building that kind of a community around it, because I want to do weird stuff. And a lot of times I feel like I'm just going to have to figure out the venue myself, and I think that it's, I think that everyone, even like people, like there's someone that runs one of the big film festivals up here that I'm friendly with, and I've done some free work for that. We were talking about doing a screening, and one of the shorts that we have that has like a tiny bit of nudity in it, he's a little bashful about showing it and it's like, just, I'm telling you, it's very conservative.
Yeah. That's like the cheapest special effect.
Yeah. And it's very tasteful. It's like a witch, it's like a part of a witch. I mean, it's not even like sexual or anything, and there, it's funny. There's like there's like about 2 solid minutes of gut eating, and nobody seems to have a problem with that part of it. It's like the woman's breast.
That. Yeah. Like sexuality and our bodies and everything is just like something that we all literally have and go through and do and all that. So I never quite understood why it's so foreboding to be, seen in a movie or anything where like, violence and stuff.
Yeah, no, it's always been the case. Yeah, and especially like war-based violence, like, like Friday the 13th again would be, way too far, but like Rambo or Chuck Norris could, kill 8,000 people with a machine gun, and that's totally fine. But we do seem to be in a place that's a little bashful about sexuality, which wasn't the case. And, my girlfriend and I both like, classic erotic movies, not necessarily like pornographic, but, and I think that, it's another thing that we would like to see return, like just like kind of like heady, arty eroticism that, like Jean Rollin or something.
I was just watching Lips of Blood, a French film from the 70s.
Yeah, seems to be that's him, Jean Rollin.
Okay,
that's one of his.
See, like I said, I don't read the credits.
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah, it's fine. He made, he made these kind of surreal, sexy, mostly vampire. It's, they're very interesting movies. I mean,
and it's got that charm. It's got that stylization that makes it fun.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next for you? Is you said you're working on screenplays? Anything else going on for you?
Well, again, I'm trying to put together, hopefully I want to do this little screening with some of our shorts, including an extended version of one that will have the duo who did the score do a live score too, along with some of our other stuff. And that one I wanted to try to do the 5 boroughs, and I was going to do like sort of, well, I don't want to give away everything, but I was going to do like a flyer that had like the 5 connecting them like a pentagram. And then I might do a little tour of things around, maybe going down the Southeast, because I know a lot of people, and I've had a couple of venues have talked to me, but mostly trying to get a couple of scripts off the ground. Yeah. I mean, just, we have 2 or 3 pieces that are in production. Couple animated. One is pretty close, which I'm, is way behind schedule, but it's going to be a great piece. It's like this Akira style dystopian animation for this like up and coming synth punk band. And then another one of the filmmakers we work with, we have a slightly longer animated piece of hers that I think is going to be brilliant. And I was trying to get a little funding for that, but it's a little controversial, so nobody really wants to touch it. So we might just have to, do it in-house as much as we can. I mean, I think it's beautiful, and I don't want to censor her at all. So it's like, It's the kind of coming of age thing that a young woman who has been watching nothing but weird horror her whole life would come up with. It's really great. And then, just, so trying to finish these things and a few other smaller pieces, but yeah, mostly getting some bigger films, but also to, take over all of media, make media weird again, like create new platforms, create new venues. I mean, that's the sort of, try to get everybody who's doing weird stuff to, get out there and do it, like meet everybody. Like, I kind of think of, doing screenings and production as like, community organizing in some way. And every time we do something, I meet someone new and start talking to them about doing, there's not, I mean, and nothing wrong with social media. I've like, become friendly with a lot of people. There's a guy who has a gallery in Italy who's come to the city that we've hung out with. And, I wrote an introduction for his latest book because he's, and it's really amazing the kind of connections you can make with people on social media. But there's something nice about, doing it in the real world
life
too.
Yeah, I got to get into that a little bit more. Last year I was drawing at Goth Night every month, which was a nice way to get to know the oddballs in town and make some connections there. But it'd be nice to do some kind of film thing in town too. There's a great old theater. I think it's like the oldest theater in California. That'd be pretty cool to do some kind of Alamo type screening there. But, that's why I got this thing started too, is at least I can, even though I'm in a small town now, I can get to know some people that I have been, seeing
Where
on
are you
Instagram.
now?
I'm in Grass Valley, California, which is like halfway between Reno and Sacramento, California. So it's kind of up in the hills and the woods, but
my girlfriend is from far Northern California, so we're there
like
at least
Arcata and stuff.
Eureka, very close to, yeah. I mean, might as well be. They're sort of the same town almost, and I like it up there. I'd never been. It's like very remote, but it's cool. It's a cool place. So we're there at least once a year.
I wish it wasn't so hard to get to because we're not that far from it. It's really the same distance as to like LA, but it's all 2-lane in the woods kind of roads, which isn't fun to drive.
No, I've definitely, the first couple of times we went, we did that where you fly to San Francisco and then get a rental and drive, and that is not easy. Flying, it costs a little more to fly to Arcata, but it's totally worth it.
Oh yeah, I bet. Or I wonder if could you do like Portland and then down? Would that help at all?
I think it's about the same amount of driving. Yeah. So
my brother just moved up there out into the middle of Oregon.
It's a cool part of the country though. I like it. There's and the downtowns are, there's surprisingly a lot of stuff happening there, really keep them going. So yeah,
that's true. I love the architecture in Portland. We love old Victorians and stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, so where can people find you? You're on Instagram, obviously.
We're www.khloaris, Khloaris.com, and then we're at Khloaris everywhere. I mean, I try to I've even made like accounts at places like TikTok and Blue Sky, but I've never really done anything there. I mean, we do a little bit of Twitter. I mean, we don't really get much play, and sometimes Facebook, but mostly just filter stuff out from Instagram. And I haven't even been super active on social, but I do try to at least once a week put some, kind of modulated clips from something on there. So
yeah, definitely recommend checking out the feed from your Instagram. Like a lot of obscure, strange stuff that gets the imagination going. But you seem to do something with your captions where you kind of pretend that it's a blockbuster movie that's just come out, like Oppenheimer.
I do that sometimes. That's one of my long-running jokes that I also sometimes take something that's like a totally unrelated piece of like literature or criticism, and I apply it to that as well, because I feel like it kind of creates new context. sometimes just totally randomly. I have like an enormous library right here, and I'll open up a book that has absolutely nothing to do with what the clip is, and then I'll find like a stanza and I'll put, and it just seems to, at least in my mind, it creates something new. But then sometimes, I do like to, that's a long running joke that, these really bizarre movies from, Thailand or something, are in Oppenheimer or something. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listeners got to check that out.
Yeah. And when there is more Khloaris news, it'll always be on Instagram first. So,
Kenneth Filmer, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah. No, thank you it's nice, to do one of these, because, I enjoy your account. Keep posting, and let me know what you're up to, and if you ever need a hand or just like want to screen something out in New York or just whatever, shoot the breeze, let me know.
Hell yeah.
This has been the Cheap Chills Show. For more spooky fun, follow us on Instagram at Cheap Chills Fan Club. Thank you for listening.